Welcome to the Love Your Life and Yourself podcast, the weekly show where science meets soul and mom chaos meets mind mastery. You're not just a mom. You're a woman with dreams, a career, a body that needs care, and a soul that craves more. This podcast is your permission slip to stop surviving and start thriving in motherhood, health, career, and stress resilience. I'm your host, Dr. Ashley Rath, and every week we bring you actionable insights and transformative conversations to help you create a life you truly love. From evidence-based wellness strategies to authentic self-discovery, we'll explore what it takes to thrive through expert interviews and real unfiltered stories. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome back, everyone. So today's guest is Dr. Ruth Kastner, a research associate at the University of Maryland and one of the few voices making quantum physics both accessible and meaningful. She's the author of The Transactional Interpretation of Quantum Mechanics. And today we're diving into the mystery of reality itself. So welcome, Dr. Kastner.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be with you.
Yay. So I start all the podcasts with this question. Before we
Okay.
dive into particles and wave functions and all of the different quantum ideas, what does loving your life and yourself mean to you right now in this season of your journey?
Oh, well, yeah, I mean, that's such an interesting question and theme. I have to say, sadly, a week ago, my mother passed away.
Hmm.
So, now
I'm
she was
sorry to hear that.
94. Well, thank you. She was 94. And the question is, I guess, particularly apt in times when we are dealing with these kinds of family tragedies. She was in very good health, having some increasing issues, but it was a surprise because she just seemed, we had just celebrated her birthday in May, and she seemed just fine. But um you know I think for me, in kind of navigating through a challenge like that, a lot of it starts with acceptance. I think it
Hmm.
starts with self acceptance. So I think, especially in our culture, we're kind of taught to be a little bit, at least outwardly, stoic, and the expression of certain emotions, particularly sadness,
Hmm.
is kind of not cool. It's not considered cool. It's like it's considered okay to get angry. It's almost more acceptable to be like angry than sad.
I would
And
agree
I
with
think
that.
that kind of starts with, yeah, well, thanks. I mean, I think it starts with just really being aware that it can be a tough world out there, and especially for women, and you encounter a lot of things in life that are going to make you feel sad, and it's okay to be sad. So that's kind of one thing I've been learning to be open to, is feelings of sadness, and the positive end of that, about loving yourself, is compassion. For Starts with acceptance and compassion for yourself and where you are, because you kind of can't move into a more positive note, without at least accepting where you are in the moment. So that
Hmm.
would be kind of my starting place.
I love that. Yeah. So
Well, thank
Uh,
you.
yes, thank you for sharing that, especially being vulnerable with a very close person in your life and how to be okay with that, to be okay with that season of grief and sadness. So I think we all have those moments, but not all of us are willing to admit that, especially out in the public. So, okay,
Mhm.
so most people don't know you, and I am getting to know you too. I did a little bit of homework before this, but I'd love if you can just kind of share your story. How did you get to where you are now? Take us back to the beginning of who you are and your interests and all the things of how you got into this world of quantum.
Oh, okay. Well, I have to give a lot of credit once again to my parents. They were both scientists, and my father was a solar physicist. So
Oh,
he was a
interesting.
physicist who specialized in the sun, in studying the properties of the sun, and especially how they are revealed through their spectra, through the the colors, the different kinds of light that comes off the sun. And very, you could get obviously very technical about that. And I remember visiting he worked at NASA at Goddard Space Flight Center in Greenbelt, NASA Goddard Space Flight Center, in that their department there, the research department. And I remember going to his office and just see back then, when computers were these big giant, things that like almost filled the whole room, or at least just side of your wall. And they used computer paper, right? So you had these stacks of computer paper with numbers on them. I'm like, okay. And of course we would use them for scratch paper and draw pictures on them. But so from a very young age, obviously I was immersed in this world of research and learning about the world. And I always had that curiosity. And my mother was a math educator.
Mm.
So, I had the benefit of, a very scientific kind of household that we grew up in. And I had an older sister and a younger brother. And, but I always had, kind of wanted to know what's really going on. What is really going on behind the world of appearance? Because on some level, I kind of sensed that we're not seeing everything that's there. And I kind of thought,
Yep.
okay, well, physics is kind of the study of what's going on to the best of our ability, using the kinds of tools that we have to learn more about what's really going on. So that kind of, I did other things. I was really into, I'm still an amateur musician. So I
Mm.
spent some time in my early, like in high school and college, kind of getting off into music, but came back to physics.
That's amazing. We really don't hear of both sides like
Mhm.
that, having such a sciencey background. So tell me about your work now. What do you do now? Some people have no idea what quantum physics or quantum mechanics even are. So would you like let's think like eighth grade level for the person listening. Like, what is it that you do, and what is it that you research?
Okay, well, I mean, physics is the study of, we try to formulate laws that will help us predict what we're going to see, involving the kind of systems we're interested in. And, it's not at all surprising that, most people are kind of going, what, scratching their head, what is this quantum mechanics stuff? Because really, 100 years ago, 150 years ago now, the physicists of the time were trying to do that, and ran into some problems. So I mean, the first thing you need to know about quantum mechanics is it got developed because the usual kind of way of Newton's laws, the usual kinds of ways of looking at the objects we see in our world, suddenly didn't work anymore when they started to try to see how the smallest constituents of nature are behaving. So things like atoms, I mean, I'm sure your listeners know that, the concept of an atom is kind of a very small fundamental building block of things that we see. So if you have like a brick of gold, let's start with something really posh. So, a brick of gold, well, if you go into a very microscopic level of that, there's actually single atom of gold, and it's like you can't break gold down any further. That's the idea. So when
Hmm.
they tried to work with these kinds of small entities, suddenly they realized, oh my goodness, my usual theories are not going to work. And the main thing about it is that if you applied the theories of those times, the classical theories, to say an atom of gold, it would tell you wrong things. It would tell you that, oh, this little atom of gold is going to, the little electron and little charged particles that are part of the atom are going to just spiral down and crash into the nucleus of the atom. Poof, and there's you're gone. Your atom is gone. So basically, those laws were not working for atoms, and so the physicists of that time had to kind of go back to the drawing board and say, there's something different going on when we get to these very tiny objects. Something really seriously, strangely different is going on. And we wouldn't have time to go through that entire history here, but I've written about it a little bit in some of my books, where the key figures, mainly Werner Heisenberg, kind of went off and had to rethink the whole way they're approaching the problem, and he came up with a formalism that had a really strange mathematical character. It involved these arrays of numbers called matrices. And he didn't even know what that was at the time, but he realized, just kind of working with the data and seeing what patterns were coming out of the data, he came up with this theory that was kind of a purely mathematical construct, but it seemed to work at some level. What it did was it helped you predict the probability that you would get a certain kind of energy, and that you would see the right sorts of kinds of, basically, spectra, the kinds of light that were coming out of atoms when you heat them up, and so on. So there was empirical data that they were working with. The atoms were yielding these kinds of patterns in their energy structure, and when Heisenberg arrived at this formulation, it worked. It had nothing to do with telling you a force pushing on something, in the usual kind of classical way of thinking,
Hmm.
but it worked. And so that came to be called quantum mechanics, and there are different forms of it. Schrodinger did something else where he approached the the mathematical formalism in it. He cast it into a way that seemed more physical. He started talking about waves and wave functions, and that was kind of a special case of the theory that Heisenberg worked with. And it's a little bit more, it gave people a more of a sense of, okay, there's something physical out there, maybe a wave that's propagating in some way, but it's not like a water wave, a sound wave. It has a very different kind of character. So these mathematical objects are basically what we refer to as quantum theory, and it works. It gives us the probability that when we're measuring a system, we're going to get an outcome, and those probabilities can be verified. So, I mean, what it won't tell you is, for any particular observation, what result am I going to get? It will not give you this kind of causal deterministic account. So it has these kinds of features that a lot of people are uncomfortable with. And so
Because you
what I
can't
do
see them,
is,
right?
you know, well, you can't see them, but also you can't even say, for instance, with the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, that says that if you are dealing with, say, take an atom of hydrogen, that if you want to find out what its position is, you can do a kind of measurement that localizes it. But the uncertainty principle says that then its momentum, meaning how fast it's going, is completely indeterminate. So it's like these things do not behave like baseballs. They're either very specifically at a point, but then you can say nothing about how fast they're going, or else, alternatively, if you measure how fast they're going, then they aren't localized at all. So they've got this strange elusive character. There's also what's called non-locality, where different systems seem to be kind of connected to one another in a way that is just not, you can't think of it in a classical way. These connections, I mean, this is cases where you have these so-called entangled particles, and you can send them off, each of them off, to different sides of the galaxy, and have somebody at one end measure a particular property, and have someone at the other side of the galaxy measure a similar kind of property, and they'll get these correlations that can't be explained by them sending light signals to one another, between one another. So that's what's called non-locality. And again, it's this kind of behavior that is very hard to understand. So that's what makes the theory puzzling.
Why do you think this matters? Like, not just in a science way, but in a way to understand reality, or even like day to day life.
Well, of course, People, I think people can go about their ordinary lives very, very well without knowing any quantum mechanics, you know. So, um, but I guess, and a lot of them do. And of course, the human race got by pretty well without it for a long time. But I think, you know, what I've been noticing when I try to, you know, go in there as a philosopher, as a philosopher, but basically what you're doing is kind of going, okay, I want to think about this theory as not just some recipe that's useful, you know, because I want to build something and okay, I need to use this to help me build it, but rather what's really going on. I mean, to think that theories work when a theory is good and when it clearly works. It's probably because it's telling us something about reality. So because I want, you know, that's kind of my curiosity. I'm looking at it and I'm going, what is this theory seemingly telling us? And so one of the things that I've feel like I'm seeing the theory tell us is that, you know, if you look at these mathematical objects, they have this character that basically they're complex, which means they involve so-called imaginary numbers. Um, and this complexity means that they can't really be stuff that's fitting into our usual space time, you know, our space-time world of appearance, because that involves real numbers only. You know, you don't say, well, my car is, you know, 3 plus I meters away from me, where I is the imaginary number, the imaginary unit. Things are always, you know, real numbers apply to the space-time domain. So it seems kind of reasonable to think that maybe, you know, if we take these objects as real, they're referring to some aspect of reality that is not contained in space time. So it's a kind of a surprising idea, but it's the logical implication if you take the theory seriously. So these objects in quantum theory, like wave functions and quantum states and so on, they have this mathematical character. More technically, it's called Hilbert space. So they are elements of Hilbert space. And this is a mathematical space that is really not space time at all. So is this space describing something in the world? And so what I've been kind of putting out there is the idea that our physical reality is kind of like an iceberg. You know, it's a useful metaphor where the tip of the iceberg, you know, the part that we see above the water, that's our space-time realm of appearance. That's what classical physics describes, the stuff we can directly see.
Hmm.
So, but on the other hand, the submerged portion of the iceberg, this is the stuff that, you know, metaphorically is being described by quantum theory, by things like wave functions and quantum states and so on. So this is physical stuff that's really there, but it is there at a subtle level. And this is kind of a recognized, you know, even though my particular way of formulating it might be seem a little radical or you know, or a bit strange, it's actually widely understood that the quantum level is in some sense kind of hidden from us.
When I first started hearing even about like what quantum mechanics was about or quantum physics, I was super intrigued because they kind of attached it to like the consciousness of us humans, of like the non-physical part of, you know, mind, body, and spirit. So not necessarily the like a religion, right, but like that
Hmm.
energy, that what makes us different, us as humans, like alive humans versus like a corpse, is that spirit, right? Like body, mind, and soul. So when you're dead, like you still have a technically a body and a mind, or not really a mind, but your brain is still there, like your physical body is still there. But the difference is that energy, that consciousness, that spirit or soul, or I feel like there's a lot of different words for this. And then to take that another step further, then you go into like the law of attraction and how these particles and even like our thoughts and emotions carry this energy or like non physical part of ourselves, and how that can affect all the other particles around us, including other people and their non-physical thoughts and energies and emotions. And it like opened this whole world of holy crap, like this interconnectedness, like you said, but like not just in a physical time space. So like I'm sure people have had experiences where they think about something and then like it happens and it's not even close to happening in your physical world. Or they think about this person that is on the other side of the country, and all of a sudden they message or text them or reach out, or they see them on Facebook or whatnot. And so from actual reality standpoint, I feel like I've connected some of quantum physics to those, like, wow, like they're kind of superpowers of once you start becoming aware of it, you realize that these are not just accidental. They're not coincidences, I guess you could say. So let's take your sciencey brain, and maybe you agree or disagree what I just said, but could you expand on that a little bit?
Yeah, sure. Of course, it's, there's been a lot of, interesting interpretive speculation about, to what extent does quantum theory relate to these inner experiences that you've described that are, everywhere, permeate the human race and, probably other animals and so on. And those are valid experiences, and it make one can definitely kind of say maybe if we take this quantum formulation as expressing something about an inner reality, one can think of it in those terms. One can think of it, that there are various metaphors, and there's the iceberg metaphor that's one of them that kind of looks at it as saying this is all, I'm going to call it physical simply because it's a theory of physics, without really saying, well, what do we mean by the term physical? Something real, something in the world. This so-called submerged portion could, on the other hand, be viewed as an internal. You can definitely think of it, and there's a geometric sense in which that's valid, as expressing the internal reality of systems as opposed to kind of an external reality, which is the world of appearance, where we all see and measure things on a very um, overt level. But that's a legit way to think about it. In terms of consciousness, there one has to be careful because consciousness historically entered quantum theory because it was kind of used as a way to get measurement results. It was used as a way to try to solve the measurement problem. And it turns out, with the work I've been doing, I've been showing why you don't specifically need to say things like, well, consciousness collapses the wave function. You don't need to say that. You can have a much more um, clear physics theory account of what's going on when we measure, but still the idea that the quantum level of reality is this hidden reality that can be seen as internal, and it can be interpreted as expressing the the other properties of something being internal, which is experience and consciousness. So that's a legitimate connection to make there, and the question is, just what would be the details of that. But I think for your audience and your interests and the themes of your show, the really interesting part about quantum theory as I've been developing it is the notion of possibility. So,
Mm.
what I've been suggesting is that the the everyday world of appearance is what we want to call actuality. Okay, so like I'm sitting in this chair that everyone can corroborate. I'm sitting in this chair. That's an actuality. But the hidden property, the hidden aspects of reality that are people's internal, thoughts and feelings and so on, and the quantum level, that's that is really, in a rigorous sense, one can say that's a domain of possibility, because there are elements of that can become actualized events in the space-time world, but they cannot all. But by the whole theory itself, it says when you measure something, you're going to have basically a set of possible outcomes, and you're only going to get one of those. So that means all these other possible outcomes are possibilities, before one gets actualized. So there's I think in a very real sense, this hidden part of reality that's described by quantum theory is a world of possibility. And to me, that does have practical implications, since really on a more rigorous level, we live in this, what I call quantum substratum. We actually live, our bodies are actually made of systems that are located not in space time in a very technically correct sense. So we actually live in the submerged portion of the iceberg, and what we experience when we see, the events, is that we're seeing the tip. We're kind of, okay, we can all agree that that happened and that happened, but we actually live in this quantum realm, and
And
it's a realm of possibility.
what does that like how would you describe that in reality? Like we all can let's just take an example like of I don't know. The first thing came to mind, like we all experienced COVID. Well, most of us experienced COVID. Like that was an event that
Hmm.
happened. Um, so that's like the tip of the iceberg. How would you describe that underwater from a quantum standpoint?
Well, the all the interactions that are going on physically in the world, at least to the extent they can be described by quantum theory, was part of the COVID experience. So that, that was involving processes that were going on at a fundamental level, um, and the events that everyone could corroborate. It's like we were all participating in this iceberg, but we actually kind of live metaphorically in the submerged portion. But we can all agree, that okay, here's what's going on the tip. Another way to think about it perhaps is that what we call space time, the space time world of appearance, is kind of like a view screen, so that we're sort of looking at the view screen, and certain events are popping up on that, and we're each in our separate little spaceship, if you will, although some of them might be correlated, and we're all agreeing on what's on the view screen, but from different viewpoints.
Mm,
So
yes.
that's one way to think about space time. But we actually live in the rocket ship. The rocket ship is not the view screen, but it's real,
Yeah.
but it also has, and this is, all metaphors have their limitations, but I think that, sometimes I use the metaphor of the online role-playing games, or the multiplayer role-playing games, where people have, both my daughters were very much into this, so I played with them a little myself. So you have an avatar, like I used to play EverQuest with my
Hmm.
daughters, right? So you've got your cool little avatar. I think I was a dark elf or something, and your avatar's running through the little forest, and we all know, we're like, hey, Janet, I got my dark elf here. We know we're not literally in that game, but that's metaphorically, that's the space time theater, is what
Yeah.
the avatar is doing on your little screen. So it's actually a very small part of the reality. And what people, I think, get into is they think the view screen is the only reality. That's kind of, these are all very kind of radical ideas, and it's somewhat speculative, but I think it's consistent in the sense that, we're all like users in a game, and we all can corroborate what's going on in the game from different the POV, different points of view. But that world is, in a sense, the virtual reality, while the real one is, where we really live, is quantum land with all its possibilities. And that's what I think is really powerful, is that in the game environment there are certain rules that apply. This would be relativity, this would be nothing could go faster than the speed of light, and so on. But that doesn't apply to kind of outside the game environment. And this is why we get things like non locality and property seemingly not being well defined, because it's sort of like, metaphorically speaking, on the game, okay, I've got my little dark elf running through the Nectulos forest. Will there be a tree there or not? Well, I'm the user. I don't know. Let me think. Do I want to put a tree, or do I? this would be the game writers, I guess. I don't have
Mm-hmm.
control over that, but what, do I want my avatar to pick up this little, quest item or whatever, and you have options, you have all these possibilities, because there isn't really the same kind of mechanical deterministic law applying to you that seems to apply to the items in the game environment. So you have a lot more leeway, and so that's kind of one thing I think that's useful, is that possibilities are real. Whether we want to call them physical or not, or mental, that's kind of a secondary matter of
Mm-hmm.
metaphysical decision making on what's the substance. I don't know. I don't tend to be big on those, but the point is that the theory can describe possibilities that need not all be actualized. And those possibilities can belong to us if we recognize that they're available.
Mm. So how do you, I think possibility is like the word that or the emotion that comes up is like very hopeful, right? Like isn't
Mm-hmm.
possibility like oh my god, you start to wonder, you start to get curious. Um you start to, you're not living in like this here now, like, right, the time space reality. You can start to daydream and imagine more. And so I'm just trying to take these theories and try to implement them into a day to day. Like how do you interpret these things or use them in your day to day life, um, to maybe help you grow or develop or learn or expand? I don't. It doesn't necessarily have to be something, but I just think of that aspect of contribution and what you're doing in your work. But how do you take these possibilities and turn them into real life um, wins, I guess you could say?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the key insight I think that's valuable to me is that the world at a fundamental level is not a machine. It
Mm,
is not mechanical. It's not deterministic.
mm-hmm.
But with Newton, we got the so-called clockwork universe, and the god as absentee landlord. Or okay, I set it all up now. I'm going to go away. Whatever.
Yeah.
That it kind of has led. Newton was brilliant. Okay, and he came up with some really good theories, and so on. But it's that mechanical, that classical physics mechanical model that denies this notion of possibility.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's either going to happen or it isn't, and it's very digital. And quantum mechanics came along and said, "No, I'm sorry. That works at a certain level, that works, but it's not the truth about reality." And in fact, I mean, if you look at like a hydrogen atom, it's possibility that is literally, in a sense, holding that atom as a stable object. It's because of the uncertainty principle that the electrons that are sort of bound to this nucleus, which is a proton, they're puffed out. They've got this size. They're not just spiraling in because of electromagnetic attraction, and that is because you cannot um, localize that electron any further without it getting a lot more energy. So it's going to push back on you. And this is literally the electron retaining its prerogative to be anywhere it wants around that atom, around that nucleus. So it's literally possibility that makes our matter stable. If we did not, if electrons were not behaving in this way, where they are going to enforce their possibilities to be anywhere, and that you're not going to localize, you're not going to say, okay, there you are at all times. No, it's going to say, no, sorry, you can't do it. And those possibilities are that strong, that they have physical implications. So this is kind of like, for me, the message is, possibility is literally the strongest thing in the world because it keeps the world structured. It's what's holding up the world, not some mechanical thing. If you apply your mechanical law to that electron, to that atom, it's going to go poof and be gone. So literally, possibilities, in the sense of having no fact of the matter about where this electron is, that that is that's the strongest thing in the world. So they're real. These possibilities are really real. And kind of taking that on a gut level, it's a surprising kind of perspective. But when you take that at a gut level, you go, okay, literally possibilities are holding up the world. And the minute I allow myself to kind of deny that and get into a cause effect, input output mechanical view, I'm no longer alive in a sense. I'm just like a domino falling, like a machine being
Mm-hmm.
passively acted on. So the power is in stopping and going, no, I'm not a machine. I always have live options because the world is literally made of live options. And so
Mm-hmm.
you just let yourself take a minute and be open to what live option is out there that I might not have thought of. And it just involves being receptive, being receptive, because and I'm kind of exploring this idea a lot more recently. It has a lot of parallels with the Taoist concept of yin. So and yin is an aspect of Western society that, well, it's not there. Let's put it that way. I mean, because machines have no yin. They're
Right.
they're 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 just, and they don't really have any yang either. But in our society, what's seen is like yang. Okay, you're going to go out there and you're going to do something, and then everything's going to follow along from your yang action in kind of a mechanical way. And that's kind of the default way of thinking. And what's not appreciated and not seen is the power of yin, of being receptive. It's the key to awareness, right? you don't
Mm.
you don't have
Mm-hmm.
awareness if you're not receptive to what's going on, because like really by the very nature of awareness, it's being receptive, like open and receptive. So that's kind of taught me a lot, that it's just kind of a point of physical logic that possibilities are real in a sense and very consequential, but that in order to be able to avail ourselves of that, we have to start to be receptive to them.
Ah, yes. I feel like the last 5 years, that has been like God slapping me across the face a couple times to be like, hey, slow down. You need to become aware, because when you just have so many things going on and you're doing, like the mechanical side that you're talking about, you can't even fathom thinking about any sort of other possibility, right? Like you're just stuck in the going, in the doing. And it's very fascinating to me to hear like the science behind essentially that awareness factor, because right, it seems so fluffy. You read any sort of self-development help book or whatnot and they're like, become aware, awareness, and it's like, okay, yeah, like next, like I get it, I need to become more aware. But truly that
Hmm.
receptiveness is when you are slowed down enough to become like a receiving portal.
Right, right. And that's where all the creativity is, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
machines have no power. They are just tools. They have zero power. They do what they're told, they do what the operator says, right? So it's and this whole, I mean, what I'm working on right now is a writing project where I do explore this idea more about how actually physics itself, our traditional way of formulating physical theories, is very yang based. and it's
Mm.
very it actually becomes consequential in a way that if you view physical entities as these mindless mechanical objects, like just a bunch of gears bumping against each other, you actually get problems in physics, that things like the measurement problem of quantum mechanics, which is basically the theory cannot tell you what counts as a measurement. It basically has the standard form of the theory is in a sense kind of mechanical. But what I've been exploring is this transactional formulation that really involves different kinds of field behavior. That, I mean, this theory has been around for a while, but it's been kind of not, it's been marginalized. And it really involves more of a responsiveness on the part of fields, so-called quantum fields, these entities that are part of physics, but are traditionally viewed as just this very, like, I'm going to put something out there and there it goes. And then other stuff, it's like a bowling ball, it's going to knock that down. It's just all very mechanical. In this other theory, the fields actually are mutually responsive, and you can quantify it. You can give math that quantifies that behavior, but if you look at it, really, it means that the fields are kind of sensing one another. It
Mm-hmm.
kind of implies some very rudimentary, if you will, some ability to on the part of these quantum fields to be like, what's available to me, shall I respond to this or not, and so on. So there's actually, if you will, kind of a yin component to the field behavior in this transactional formulation. And of course, I didn't see it that way initially. And other physicists who have worked with this theory, Wheeler and Feynman, Richard Feynman and John Wheeler, certainly weren't, talking about Taoism and yin. They were just like, hey, I think this theory could be useful. So other physicists have investigated it, but it's kind of, I think that at a fundamental level, what's missing, not only in our social world and our cultural world and in our human world, but in physics itself, is this openness to the idea that responsiveness, receptivity is a real thing in the world, and,
Do you
and
think
it's not
that,
just something with,
sorry
yeah,
to
it's not just
interrupt, but
fluff, right? Yeah, no, that's okay.
yeah, do
Yeah.
you think that's because it's like, to me as a human, like we live through our senses, right? Like seeing, tasting, touching, smelling, etc. And when we talk about quantum theories, it's very much not in those five senses. It's hard to
Mm-hmm.
measure, right? Like we can't see them.
Mm-hmm.
We may experience them in some form, maybe in meditation or whatnot, or prayer or what have you. But to me, like, why do you think that's why there's kind of a stigma around the yin, I guess you could say, the non-mechanical, the the under the iceberg that you can't see?
Yeah, I think that's really a good way of putting it. I mean, there's kind of this what's called empiricism in science. It's kind of a stance that, my only role is to describe what I see, and it's not legit for me as a scientist to talk about anything that I cannot directly, detect with my five senses and so on. And people talking about their inner experiences, well, that's not scientific, and there's it becomes a bit pathological. I mean, it started by being like a, a well-intentioned effort to be scientifically responsible.
I feel
So,
like when you say pathological, I see that a ton in, I'm more in the health field here, but in
mhm.
health and medicine, and how we're looking for what's wrong from a very mechanical standpoint instead of that non-physical part too. So
Right.
I think this trickles into so many other things of our day-to-day lives in addition to just, science. Right?
Yeah, yeah, it really does permeate the Western culture, so to speak. I mean, the Eastern cultures traditionally are. are much more comfortable with yin, and they understand it, they see it, they experience it. I mean, the Tao Te Ching, the Taoist, book source by I think it was Lao Tzu. um, it's all about yin. It actually, in a sense, highlights yin as more fundamental. So it's kind of the go back to the game metaphor. Western culture is a lot more like, okay, what's going on in the game, and identifying with the avatar and the view screen, and I want to go out there and I want to get that money and I want to accomplish this quest, and 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 there's actually the yin. It's like, okay, I'm actually a user. I think I really need a cup of coffee right now, or whatever. Taking care of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yourself is really in quantum land all the time in a very technical sense. But we have mistaken our sense, the external sense world, the view screen, for the reality. And it's the outward external stuff you can obviously see. If you think that's all that's going on, then you're missing
Mm-hmm.
where you really exist, where your power is, where your creativity is. So it is pathological, I think.
So how do we
And I
hang
mean,
out there
yeah.
more? How do we get there more?
Well, I think the first step is to kind of tackle this very weird, counterintuitive fact that we don't live in space time. Rigorously, we don't. We do
Mm-hmm.
not live in the view screen. It's just deceptive. Like, I think I'm in a space-time container right now. Well, it's illusory. I mean, I'm not saying it's like wrong. Yes, there are actualized events that are creating these experiences of, my I feel I'm sitting in my chair. That is true. But our actual reality is beyond that, in a way that we can't point to. I mean, I always go back to the flatland analogy, because this story by Edwin Abbott about these shapes that are in a plane. Their whole world is a plane, and so their external senses apply to the plane, the level of that plane. And then this 3D creature comes in, and this sphere comes in and starts playing all these games with our little square guy, who's our little protagonist. And it's really crazy, and freaks him out. And that's because it's like analogous to quantum phenomena. Like, what's going on in my world? I'm seeing these non-local strange phenomena, that violate relativity, violate the rules of my plane. But the metaphor would be that we are all really 3D shapes. So if we think of that square, that little guy who thinks he's just a square, he's actually a cube, and he's really not contained in flatland. It's just a slice. It's like a little cross section of him that lines up with what he thinks of as his space-time realm, but he's actually more than that. So that's the first step, is just kind of not always believing your external senses, and just by sense of logical consistency. This is what physics tells us. If you take it literal, if you take it seriously, that our reality is bigger than that. That's
I
what you
think,
start from.
yeah, that's huge. I understand when you say, time, space, reality, but to give kind of an analogy to our listeners is I was reading, I can't remember what book it is. I think it's Happy Pocket Full of Money. I forget what book. Don't quote me on that. But they give this
Okay.
analogy to describe time, space, reality, and how we're not necessarily in this linear life, right? Like it, and the way they describe it is, think about um, like a piece of paper, and all of your life events um, are on this piece of paper, and you like can picture this piece of paper as like possibly linear, like, oh, I was born and then I was dead and then all these life events happen in between, right? That's how most people would think of their time space reality, like it's this, then this, then this. And the way this book had described it is, think about like all those events happening, and then also put like your dreams and your hopes and, possibility, right? Like the potentials all on this piece of paper and like scramble them up so they're not linear. And then you can kind of just like it's like an omnipresent, like present. You can be at any one of those points at any time, but all at the same time. And it was like this like explosion of my brain. I was like, what? Like that doesn't, I've never conceptualized that. I've never
Mm.
thought of, like this omnipresence to everything. It's like, well, this happens and this happens and this happens. And I think that's such a concept to realize how, we think of like, oh, it's just going to take time when uh, time is of like, some people have different opinions on time, but like realistically, you speaking, like there is no time, right? Like,
Yeah, I think that to kind of make it more clear, I think of time as having really there being kind of two different modes of time. The time that we measure with our clocks is the space-time, space-time tip of the iceberg time. But what's going on with the quantum level is that sort of time does not exist. So that's the sense in which you can kind of
right.
think of that as the eternal now. So that's
Mm-hmm.
that's now. And I mean, when Eckhart Tolle, who wrote his book The Power of Now, and he's very big on this concept of the now. And I think there's the truth to that is that is where we live. We are always now. And we're always now, and that's where we live, and that's the quantum level. This concept of, at time, time 3.1, whatever captain's log, give me whatever start date you want. That is just a label for what we call an actuality that happened on your view screen. So everyone can go, okay, I can corroborate, I'm a Trekkie. So the Enterprise reached planet XYZ. It's, uh, star date, whatever. We can all corroborate that,
Mm-hmm.
but we still live in the now,
Correct.
right? So another way to think of it is that the so-called space-time events with their times and locations, that's like the snake skin that's getting cast off. Okay, all right, we all agree that happened. We can corroborate that this happened or that happened. But the living snake is always now. We're always now. And that timeless now is where we live. That's the quantum level. And that's what everything comes out of. And so in a sense, I push back on the idea that, that and Tolle, well, he's also right, I think, when he says the so-called future, because the future, in a sense of having time, a time index like that or a star date, really doesn't exist. It's possibility. So one can kind of think of the future. Well, I have many possible futures. Nothing has been actualized yet. I have many possible futures. I can
Mm-hmm.
sit in my captain's chair and and decide. Obviously, there are constraints on us. Like I can't just become like a pink elephant with wings or whatever. There are constraints on us, but there are lots of possibilities, and we're in the now. So that's kind of the way I see it, that there isn't really an actualized. The term future is just a word that means, possibilities.
Mm, I like that. It makes me want to dig into a lot of different rabbit holes after talking to you. Good thing I have the transcription because I'm like, oh, I've never heard of that one before. Uh, okay, so your work, um, RTI or relativistic transactional interpretation. That was a mouthful. Um, what is that?
Well, the short answer is that it's a version of quantum theory that works with the so-called what's called the direct action theory of fields. So it it formulates, and you can get very technical with this, but I mean that the short answer is it involves field behavior that has mutuality, and that, in other words, when things happen that we can call a measurement process, it's because you had, say, an excited atom that, if you will, is slightly unstable. It's got like extra energy. So take a hydrogen atom and call it excited. That means that the little electron has absorbed some energy. It's bumped up to this higher state. It's not in this so-called ground state. It's in a higher state. And then you can have another atom that's in its ground state, so that you have basically what would count as an emitter, something that can emit some energy, and an absorber, something that can absorb some energy. And this transactional approach, the direct action theory, involves active participation by absorbers. So this is where the kind of yin receptivity response comes in. So what you get is not just, in the usual way of looking at it, just an emitter going poof, okay, I'm done. That little photon is going to go out and go on its merry way. My job is done. That's the usual way of looking at it. That's what I call the yang only. It only sees yang. Yang is, I'm going to go put something out, right? But instead, this direct action theory says there's a mutual relationship here that you can quantify, and in an unpredictable way, but you can quantify it. At some point, these are going to mutually connect in a way that the emitter is offering and the absorber is confirming that offer. And you can label these, you can call it an offer wave and a confirmation wave. And these are field behaviors, field processes that are mutual like this, so that the absorber is active and it's really doing something to create, along with the emitter, this quantity of energy that we call a photon. So it's a participatory kind of mutual uh, physical process, and it has both yang and yin. So it has both the offer and the confirmation working together to create these what are called measurement interactions. So that's kind of it in a nutshell,
So
just
how would you
qualitatively.
apply to that on dated, like, in life? Like, what what would be, yeah, how would you apply this?
Well, the interesting thing that is, it's already out there in certain things in day-to-day life. Like if you want to sell your house, you
Mm-hmm.
need buyers. You
Correct.
can't be like, okay, I'm going to put my house on the market. My job is done. Like that's the way physics conventionally is thinking about these things. No, no, I'm sorry. You must have people out there going, I need a house. This is doing the yin thing. They're doing the inside. I want to be a receiver. Receivers are active, so they're looking and they're saying, oh, I see that's available, now I'm going to actively respond to that. That's the
Mm.
power of yin, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in day-to-day life, it it's helpful to recognize that yin is powerful and crucial and necessary, and that the more you can embody yin in your life, meaning just you don't have to outwardly do anything, it would just be present and be aware, and it can be really powerful. You'd be amazed at when you start going, oh yeah, I'm not just like I'm not just an agent of yang where I'm out poking things, but once you start using your vast reservoir of receptivity that we all have and we don't use, you get all these possibilities, just like when you're in the market for a new house, you are in control, and that's you are in control. You dictate whether that person sells their house or not. That's the power of it.
That's
being
yeah.
being a receiver is powerful. And that, I think when I've talked to a lot of women of my generation who went through, the feminist so-called revolution that hasn't actually happened, like my little soapbox here, they were
Please hop
really
on that.
leery
I
of
want to I want to hear your theories on that.
well, they were very leery of using this yin, of the whole yin yang thing, because they thought they were taught, or they thought that yin was passive. They thought that yin meant passivity. It's the
Mm.
opposite. Yin is active. It's the ability to wait and be in charge and sit on your throne and see that's what's going on around you. You are the queen. The queen is powerful because she doesn't have to be like frantically running around like a little machine. What makes her powerful is she's on her throne of yin, if you will, and nobody does anything until she decides she's going to respond to whatever she feels like responding to.
Think of the animal kingdom with this. Like, think of our animals and how these males are going out to impress all the females, like even humans, right? Like,
Mhm.
all the
Mhm.
animals we we farm. So I think of like bulls being territorial and trying to get all the cows, and the cow, the bulls will kind of decide themselves, but even maybe a different animal would be better, like turkeys or birds specifically, how they have to
Mhm.
dance, or like spray their like um sprawl their feathers out, and like, but really the woman
Mhm.
is like, okay, I guess you win, like, I guess, like, I get to
You're the
decide.
queen.
Yeah. And
We are
so
the
that's
queens.
right. And I think that's such a powerful stance of, I grew up of like, do as a business owner. Is like, you got to do more, you got to do more. And just in this last year, I've really done what you said and like slowed down, became aware, and in this more receiving stance. And it's powerful. Like, my business has been doing the best it's ever been. We've attracted like the most ideal people into our spaces, and like our marriage is better, our family, like, it's just such a weird, like you said, like in the feminist world, it's like, well, you can't let men, like, we have to become more masculine, we have to, like, like just beef
Right.
up and
Yeah,
just like
that's
do. And the more I have stepped into, in my opinion, this like femininity of yin, right, receiving,
Mhm.
I feel like that's been the most powerful in my personal life too. So I think that's, yeah,
That's
I
great.
really, I really align with what you're saying. Hmm.
Yeah, that's the sad part, I think, of that. The kind of the so-called feminist revolution really was just, women thinking that they had to be more yang, and that's just really not it at all. And I think, like it's not just a gender thing. Men too have been harmed
Oh
by
yeah.
this thing about you got to be yang, because frankly, the sexiest men are the men with the most yin, in my opinion. It because we all are combinations, and it's kind of there's a natural analogy to be made between yin and the feminine and so on. But the in the Tao Te Ching, the Tai Chi Tu, so called the little symbol, the yin has a seed of yang in it, and the yang has a seed of yin in it, and
Hmm.
it's a dynamic thing. It's not a static thing. And I'm very yang too. I go out, I can be a bull in a china shop and piss people off and stuff. So no,
Me too,
we
girl.
all
Me
are a
too.
combination. Okay,
Yes.
right. But I think balancing that and being aware that yin is powerful. It's not passive. It's not passive. It's
Mm.
crucial. And I think
Hmm.
a lot of the the unhappiness in the world is frankly people like being desperate for yin. Everyone wants to be seen. They want to be appreciated. They want to be received. They're desperate for yin. And that's what our culture denies people. And when you deny people the yin part of their relationship with the world and treat them like an isolated object that isn't seen, you're making them unhappy, and it just creates a lot of problems.
Uh, yes. Super insightful. I think we swung the pendulum, and it is coming back. It's coming back slowly. Um, but I mean, history does repeat itself, right? Like, you get these big
Yeah, you
swings
get
to
these cycles.
these cycles of,
Yeah.
of that. And I see us coming back to a little more neutral. in the grand scheme of things, especially. I don't know what it was about COVID. Maybe it was the stress. I think it was a multitude of things, but I feel like since COVID, I've seen just this like it's different. It's like a different energy. There's still a lot
Yeah.
of there's still a lot of work to be done, but um, yeah.
I think, yeah, and I think that I don't want to. I just want to kind of make clear that I'm not bashing men.
Oh gosh,
I mean,
no,
yeah, right.
no, no,
Because
no, no.
I mean, it's a universal thing, and again, men have been harmed by this thing about yang and only seeing yang, and it leads to that mechanistic thing. We do need both. I think yang
Absolutely,
is great. We need
absolutely,
creativity. You need to
yes.
put stuff out there, but we need both, and we need them to be balanced and integrated. And I think that's the key is that our society doesn't want to see yin. And I think, to just get a little psychoanalytical, yin does have, and it's different, both yang and yin manifest different kinds of properties. And yin is the aspect of dissolution, of destruction, of death. It has that in its more extreme form, and I think in a way it comes from a fear of death. I think our culture is very afraid of the concept of dissolution and so on. But like you got to prune back your rose bushes to have them look beautiful the next season, and
Mm-hmm.
it's a natural part of nature, and we need that. You need to clear away for new stuff to come out and to have that creativity. So we desperately need both, and we need them in balance. And
Yeah,
so,
no, I'm not bashing it either
yeah.
side. I
Hmm.
think that dance between them is equally as powerful, one not better than the other. Um, but when they can talk to each other and talk isn't the right word, but um, when they can interact with each other and dance together, I think that's where, true beauty and more of that like present time, like now is there. Um, but
Hmm.
I guess that's my opinion. So
Yeah, yeah. Well, I would agree with that.
let's demyth quantum physics. So what's one myth that you hear a lot or the nature of reality that you wish, more people understood or understood
Hmm.
differently?
Well, you get different sorts of myths from, like, maybe different groups for who are coming at it from a different perspective. I guess one thing that I kind of push back on is this, say, overly naive, maybe slogan of consciousness collapses the wave function, because that's
What do you
kind
mean
of,
by that? I don't
well, when
understand that.
when people say that, it's something other people say. So
In the
they
science
are
world, because I
in
don't
the science.
understand that.
Yeah, what they're saying is, in the conventional theory, we have what's called the measurement problem, which is basically the usual theory just has this so-called wave function. Okay, I've got a wave function. It's propagating along. It's all yang. Nothing's responding to it because that's not part of my. I don't. Physics doesn't do that. That's not cool. I don't. So they assume that it's just going on like this little bowling ball, and in a very real sense, in the theory, nothing can ever happen to this wave function to give you a result that we call a measurement outcome. This is the
Mm,
Schrodinger's cat paradox. Schrodinger didn't like this either. And he said, look, what's wrong with the standard, what's wrong with this theory is it's that it's just correlating things. So I've got a radioactive atom. I'm correlating that with a Geiger counter. Now I'm going to correlate that with a cat, and it all just kind of propagates along in this yang way where you can never say. He set it up where if the atom decays, then there's something that the Geiger counter is going to trigger, and it's going to release some poison gas and kill the cat. And then, but if the atom doesn't decay in
hmm.
this box, then the cat won't, will remain alive. And the standard theory just has everything correlating along so that you supposedly get a cat in a superposition of alive and dead, and you never get an outcome. So this is a defect of the theory where it cannot tell you why anything ever happened, and we constantly get things happening. We know that we get measurement outcomes, but the theory cannot explain why. So people would say, and even some scientists would say, oh, well, okay, consciousness makes it collapse. Comes along, some external conscious observer comes along and collapses the wave function. And that's just kind of a band-aid, because you can't say what counts as this external conscious observer. So it's kind of a band-aid, but it was very popular because at the time people just didn't know what else to do to get it. They would say, well, I see an outcome. Oh, it must be my consciousness that's doing it. And this doesn't really work. I mean, it gets technical as to why this doesn't really work, but in
So what
fact,
do
what
you
we
believe?
need, well, what I just described with this transactional approach is
Oh,
that the
yeah,
fields are in fact
yeah,
interacting in this receptive way, so that you get a well-defined um, outcome, a probability for an outcome at some time, and it's the interaction that is going to give rise to that. You still can't say, exactly when it's going to happen, but you can say why, things that are described by the theory are engaging in a specific process that's going to yield an outcome.
sure.
So the linkage of consciousness to quantum theory came about in kind of a misconceived way, where it was kind of put in as a band-aid. So that's a bit of a myth. I mean, in my view, it's kind of a myth to say consciousness collapses the wave function, because you can never say, well, where did your consciousness come in? Which system was conscious and why? And why does this one count as conscious and that one doesn't? So it's actually not very scientific. And in my view, it kind of undermines the serious study of consciousness, because
Mm-hmm.
I take that seriously, and I think we need to be able to understand consciousness, and kind of using it as a band-aid in the theory is not really the way to do
Fascinating.
it.
Interesting. All right. So we are wrapping up here, and I always end with the same question too when I have guests. But what's one piece of advice you'd give someone trying to love their life and themselves more fully?
Well, I mean, I think what we were talking about before a little bit earlier is that it is scientific to think that the now, that you experience is real, and it's scientifically valid, and that as I've mentioned, I think that quantum theory is really pointing to the reality of the now, where we all live, that it is in a sense timeless, and that's where all the possibilities are. So that's powerful, and it's not just a metaphor, it's not just a feel good slogan, it's rigorously true. And so welcoming that into your life, and taking the time that you experience internally to experience that you live in the now, that's where all your possibilities are, and that's what you can
Mm,
avail yourself of.
I love that. Thank you so much,
Well,
Dr. Ruth,
thank you.
for
That's
joining
I
me.
really appreciate the invitation, and thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for tuning in to Love Your Life and Yourself. I hope today's episode gave you one more tool or one more truth to help you thrive in your health, happiness, and resilience. Remember, loving yourself isn't selfish, it's leadership. And it's the foundation for building a life that actually feels like yours. If this spoke to you, hit that follow button, leave a review, and send it to a friend who needs to hear it. And if you want to dive even deeper, grab a copy of my #1 best-selling book, Love Your Life and Yourself. It's the heart behind this podcast, and it's helped thousands of women step into a life they actually love. You can find it at drashleyrath.com or through the link in the show notes. Until next time, take care of you and keep choosing to love your life and yourself.